Promise not to ask too many questions.
All right. So we are gathered here, and we have issues with Zoom links apparently, and so happy about that. But we're going to go ahead and move on to the actual meat and potatoes. The idea here today is to kind of review some stuff. There's a lot of discussion about AI overviews and what's required to make them work and everything else. So just going to focus on the research that I've done, what I've seen, and then boiling that down to a single one-shot prompt that'll allow you to analyze any given web page. And you can look at a homepage or you can look at an internal page, but no matter how you cut it, there seems to be some patterns that are emerging right now in time. So the question of the moment is, how do we optimize content for AI search visibility? So a lot of people, frame this question as, it's just old school SEO, what's going on there? The reality is that is a good starting point, but it's really just the baseline. There's more things going on. So when I've approached this problem, my jumping off point was to build my own database of essentially occurrences across LLMs and across AI overview of what sites are showing up and then what information's in there. What ground truth do the LLMs or AI overviews? And I'm just going to use Magit to describe that. That's the Google internal name for that particular AI engine, that LLM, which is a hybrid model that encompasses a couple of things. So it's like a Gemini offshoot, but it also has some ingredients that are based on machine learning components of the overall Google search algorithm. And we know this from Google's own internal documents that came out in the antitrust suit, the penalty phase of that. Those documents were dropped in March of this year. Maybe it was February. Anyway, so that's the jumping off point. So I built basically an automation system using data for SEOs setup, their MCP, built that using Claude Code and went out and basically scoured for things that I was interested in and then tried to boil those results down into something that was useful. And then a company called AirOps also did similar research. It looks like their research was a little different than mine, but then they published their results or a synopsis of their results, not just recently. I'm not sure what the actual date was, but it also had some interesting points to it. And the takeaways that I took from my research and their research was the value of having some kind of really highly structured content on page, whether that be schema, which obviously is not human readable, or in the actual structure of the page. So let's just go through some of the findings here real quick. Just show you this one piece from AirOps. And John, am I sharing my whole screen? I think I am.
You are. So I
All right,
see both
awesome,
the tile, and then I also see all of your screen.
perfect. So hopefully that's what's being recorded for folks to see. Again, Zoom. All right. So this is one of the charts that they produced. And it was interesting because they were trying to do a comparison between sites cited in ChatGPT inference or the responses from prompts versus the SERPs. And that you could see here there's a not there's a single H1. Obviously that's a powerful factor in SERPs. 64% of their top of however they pulled the top SERPs, so they didn't state actually what their criteria was. We'll just assume we're talking page one. It may be, top three, maybe something, or may even be the top result. But as you can see, there's a delta here between that single H1 ChatGPT versus SERPs. And then this powerful piece with list sections. And then bullets exist, also a high degree of consilience there. The presence of schema. People argue about whether or not schema presence is a ranking factor or not. I think in terms of traditional SEO, what we see there is kind of an artifact, meaning that pages that are well SEO'd kind of from the get-go have a lot of things going on that are right, and everybody does schema pretty much. So that is going to be something that in terms of traditional SEO, I don't think is a huge signifier. It just means that things that are well SEO generally have schema included, but they're probably doing a lot of other things right, whether that's off page, on page, or user generated interaction. But we see a much higher presence with the chat responses, nearly 70%. Proper heading alignment, huge bias there in terms of the ChatGPT results. Hey, Pete, how are you? Rich schema, meaning that there's more than one schema type on the page, and then the presence of FAQ schema. Again, this can be artifact because not everybody uses FAQ schema, or it could be just, we can look at the delta here and see the FAQ schema is important. I'm a big believer in FAQ schema. A lot of people think it's deprecated in one respect because it's not fueling rich snippets as much anymore. But again, it's just another way of, introducing structure into a page and making it simpler for an AI to understand or read. These results, not 100% in line with my own research, but directionally, yeah, the vector's pointing in the right direction. So the new standard. So AI search engines require content that goes beyond traditional SEO. My research, the AirOps research suggests this. Rich schema, meaning multiple types of schema, are more likely to earn AI citations. And then FAQ, there's a 2x multiplier here. And again, we don't know what the entire universe or cohort selected in AirOps case. I saw a higher presence in my own research, but again, directionally about the same, roughly a 2x. I think about, and of course, when I'm doing my research, I'm looking for things that I'm interested in versus a random sampling. The stuff I'm interested in may have a higher presence of FAQ schema across that cohort than there is, across the entire universe in the wild. Again, directionally reinforced. And then we've got, this is just a recitation of that same data. And then we've got this other piece where we've got, sequential heading structure. I think everybody is aware that if you have a single H1 tag, it makes the page a lot more parsable. I think this is a fairly commonly held SEO practice to have your heading structure work. But this other piece of having a sequential heading structure, meaning that they're nested. So you've got one H1, and then within H2s, you've got H3s and H4s. If there are H3s and H4s, those pages are more likely to be cited by AI. So this, for me, if you're doing, kind of a one-shot SEO or a pillar page, for example, this really reinforces the need to have that heading structure in there. Now, we can have a zillion different theories on why this is the case, but it's pretty clear to me from reviewing the research and most of the AI research is actually on the prompting side, not on the result side. So we're looking at the inference, and I'm saying that on the inference side. Actually, the bulk of the research is done on the training side. So if we look at AI as two pieces, we've got the original training runs, and then we have sort of the web search that's driven when there's a prompt involved, the inference side. And so in both of these cases, we see that structured data is more palatable to the AI model. So the LLMs are more readily understanding pages when they have some form of structured data on it. Or when you're prompting, if you give a prompt in a structured data format, that can be Markdown, that can be XML, it can be JSON. So it doesn't have to be schema, but it needs to be a structured data format. It just makes the process easier for the LLM to onboard the content. So as we have new models coming on that are still doing training runs, you want to make sure that you have structured data so that the data that they gather is more ingestible, that there's not these gaps in understandings, or that there's a computational overhead that makes the AI basically choke or gag on any sort of sourcing. And you can see this if you build your own RAG structures. If you try to do it with unstructured data, you can struggle and get hallucinations and other issues. If you use tightly structured data, you get better results. So this is not any thing that is surprising if you're familiar with sort of the breadth of AI research and the work that's gone into more efficient training models. And certainly anybody that does a lot of work with AI directly, if you know that if you use a structured prompt, you get better results by and large. And so, that's something that doesn't impact most users. I would gather that probably 95% of people using ChatGPT on a consumer basis are not using structured prompts. Now, if you move sort of upstream through the value channel, people doing enterprise work or using AI to do coding, they're much more likely to do structured prompting. And two of the things that I've found in building automations or trying to get something like Claude Code or Klein to work well, if you start out with a structured prompt, you're sort of cooking with gas. If you don't do that first work, which is create a structured prompt, and that's usually just telling another AI, I need a structured prompt to do X, and then reviewing that, and then using that to drive your process. If you skip that step, you're going to have problems. Same thing works with creating content. If you give Perplexity, for example, a markdown document that sort of gives it framing to create content from, you're going to end up with a much better result. So those are just basic ground rules, whether it's inductive or deductive. We know that structured stuff works better. It's that simple. Not surprising. So we've got this 2.8x delta in terms of citations, pretty damn powerful. And I think this is even more powerful in the current instance because we're now seeing that ChatGPT, and I've got some research coming out that I'll probably put out tomorrow or maybe on Monday, talking about how ChatGPT is not citing Reddit as frequently. They're going to move further and further away from using sources that are flagged as not reliable, or that you can sort of bypass that by creating that additional structure, both on the traditional SEO side, but also in terms of we'll just coin the term ingestibility by the models themselves. So we can take this and using the AirOps research, my research, what do we want? We want content extractability and we want readability. So ordered HTML lists for processes and rankings, steps, sequences, instructions, best of or comparative content. Steve Toth has talked about the power of comparison pages, and then bullet points. And again, these are structural features in the content. We often look at this in terms of human readability, but obviously there's an impact here in terms of AI extractability or interpretability or ingestibility, however you want to frame how we're looking at this. And then we've got these big deltas. These are AirOps numbers, 17x more list sections, and a 3x citation rate. So again, we're seeing the same sort of thing. So we want this holistic integration on the on-page piece. We want rich schema, meaning multiple types of schema. And again, creating the stuff, if you're just doing this whole cloth, simply ask an AI to give you FAQ article or news article schema for a given piece of content. And then screen for the heading alignment and the bullet points. And then the preference here is structure over complexity. So sentence length was nearly identical between cited and non-cited pages. That's a problem for somebody like me who writes in complex sentence structures, which means if I'm writing something whole cloth and I'm targeting an AI outcome here, I probably need to take my writing and flesh it through an LLM and ask it to simplify and structure and break apart my sentence structure, because my natural way of writing and communicating is with commas and semicolons. That's just the way, in M dashes. I use M dashes, and that's just the product of my writing background. Other folks that don't have such deep writing backgrounds can probably more quickly write sort of a native AI-friendly type context. So, even when we're looking at very long-form content, which I find works well and ranks well, you still want to make sure that even within that length, you've sort of maintained the structural integrity of the piece. And this is something where my view has evolved and changed over time. I strongly believe that there's sort of these meta narrative structures that help machines understand human communication. So there's basic models. There's things like reviews. If you learned how to write a book report in elementary school, you learned how to write a review. That kind of structure is very common. It's integrated into the training data and into sort of the collective understanding of things. Then you have technical documentation, and you have things like scientific analysis. So a scientific paper has this very precise formatting where you've got, or meta-narrative. Formatting's not really what I'm talking about, but sort of the sequencing. So you have an abstract, you have, the hypothesis statement or the experimental design statement. Then you have presentation of results. Then you have a discussion based upon the interpretation of those results, and then a conclusion. If you took physical sciences in college and had lab sections, you learned how to write a lab report. That same basic meta-narrative structure follows through to scientific papers, and that is, what all AIs are grounded in are scientific texts. That is a huge part of the corpus which they're trained on. So that is a recognizable meta-narrative. The same goes within Google. Google Scholar obviously targets that same sort of content.
there's an awareness and a tuning of the old school SEO. They call them the hand tooled parts of the algorithm. Again, Google's language, not mine. The same thing goes with journalistic style, which is, if you take a journalism class or you try to mirror journalistic writing, there's the inverted pyramid, there's the focus on the 5 W's, which is actually 4 W's and an H, and then the use of primary sourcing or quotes to sort of structure the stories. Google gives a lot of credence to journalistic sourcing. So that's a meta narrative that's built in. Same goes on the AI side. Meta narratives are part of the environment. But so that's my long held theory going back several years on this stuff. But what the data is now suggesting is that, a more rigid structure that is, based upon, this easy ingestibility by the AIs probably is more important than a recognizable meta narrative. So there we go. Your path forward. Our standards, clear structure, measurable results. So let's take a look at how to take this stuff, and we're going to go ahead and put it into action. So what I did was I took my research and I took AirUp's research, and I kind of gelled it all together, and I used Notebook LM to do this. I did have to do some tweaking on my own research because, frankly, my own research was not very well structured. It started just kind of on a whim. I wanted to see what kind of things we were getting and what kinds of things we were seeing. But we flushed all that through Notebook LM and asked it to give us some directions in terms of prompting. And we ended up with a prompt. And you can actually see the prompt if you go to burstiness and complexity, which is in the chat. You can click through to the school AI. I think everybody on this call is in the school AI. You may have to join it to actually get to the classroom. But if we go here, close this up. Go to classroom tab, and then hopefully I put it up beginning. And what we're going to do is just going to copy this, all of this, see if we can actually copy it. And I'm going to go ahead and use Claude. I'm using Claude's desktop app on the Mac, just a place I'm comfortable using it. So I'm going to just copy and paste, but I'm going to say, use the following to analyze. Somebody want to give me a web page? In the chat, you can just drop it in the chat. Pete, you got a page you want us to look at? Is Pete actually on the call, or is he just recording this? John, do you have anything? Anybody have anything they want to kick out here? Bolsonelli, all right. Polsinelli, a Denver law firm? We'll find out. And now I'm just going to paste in that structured prompt. And we'll let this run.
Hey, Kieran, while that's running, something that's been on my mind is as you go down this road with all this AI stuff, are you kind of gelling around an idea that you're working towards a more perfect understanding of how these AI platforms work at sort of a fundamental level? Or are you finding that it's going to be almost more like the algorithmic updates that have traditionally happened with Google? Like, for example, all of a sudden Reddit isn't being sourced as often. Like, is that going to come back into vogue in 6 months, 12 months, 18 months? What's your opinion on that stuff?
So I think they're fundamentally different in one way, which is, and this is like, all right, seriously. Okay, it is working. I think they're fundamentally different in this way. Google's updates are in response to people's views of things in terms of SERP quality, right? Whether or not that is a response to black hat tactics, or whether it's a response to their own economic and commercial needs. You can argue about that all day, but they clearly tweak their algorithm to get a result. I think the LLMs are not motivated in the same way yet. They are, their motivations are different. They're looking for things that probably reduce their computational cost on one level, but also things that just reflect the evolution of the models themselves and the training data. And I don't think that there is that, when I think of a Google update, I think of Google putting their thumb on the scale, right? I think when we see changes in the way that AIs interpret things, we're not necessarily seeing a thumb on a scale. I think we're seeing an evolution of the technology. Obviously, there's, ChatGPT just, has reduced their reliance on Reddit. And if you ask ChatGPT about it, it will tell you about it. I mean, it's not something that they, that I don't believe that they've actually made a public statement, but you query the model and it will give you an explanation. So I just see these things as fundamentally different, and I don't necessarily see them as having a cyclical bent. And I think one of the things driving what's happening with the whole piece or the whole cloth on Google's side is they are responding to a whole bunch of pressures, whether they're commercial pressures internally or regulatory pressures from the outside. And I just don't see because of that and the complexity of the algorithms, I don't believe that there's a single human, there's a single engineer that understands all of what's happening across the entire search universe in Google. And the other piece of it is they have handed off so much of it now to machine learning that it's not because of the interpretability issues. I don't believe it is possible to understand at any T1, any specific time of the entire universe of search. So I think it is probably headed into a direction that is more like what we're seeing with the AI models, but I don't think the AI models are going to continue chasing something in the same way that Google chases things. Does that answer the question? I may have overinterpreted that. Oh, perfect, he says. Okay. So no, not a diversion at all. I think that's, it's really, it's a fundamental, it's a keystone question. So let's see what it kicked out. So this is suggesting that there's a catastrophic AI visibility barrier because of the heavy JavaScript dependency, which is interesting. And so when you run this prompt, it's interesting. I will show another example here in a second where it actually went ahead and used its MCPs. And I don't know that we may have an MCP failure right now with Playwright. So I'm using Google, I'm using Claude Desktop. I've got a number of MCPs connected to it. So the data for SEO MCP, which I think probably failed on startup, and Playwright, and which is an MCP that allows a tool called to browse the web and extract data. And then I'm not sure what all else I've got out, but sometimes this will open up a Chrome instance and do this analysis, and other times it won't. So, but here we've got a whole checklist of things, and what they're saying is that there's a big problem with this site. And Claude's gone ahead and given us some tools and a work plan. So I'll go ahead and post this in the school classroom from this call, or you can just run this on your own and see. But fascinating. So I did one earlier this morning, again, testing this out. And what I did was I ran this against a local dog groomer. This is where I get my dogs groomed, my doodles, and so I do some marketing stuff for them. And we are right now, their website is a website that they paid a local designer to do, and then they had some issues with them, and so I basically copied. I had AI build another version of their website that they could actually control, and got them a new domain name. So anyway, but this is based upon, you know, kind of a typical site that a local web designer would do. And
Garen, could you
sure.
show the prompt? I'm sorry, I might have missed that the first time when you ran the prompt. Okay, and this is the prompt. Gotcha.
This is the prompt. So this is
Okay.
in this classroom in the school group.
Thank you.
For people watching this later, the school group's in the chat, or I will post it someplace. So literally, I just I copy the prompt and I tell it, you know, use the following to analyze website or web page X. And then I paste in the prompt, and this is what happens. So in this case, it actually went out and it used Google to read the page, and it didn't have any of the JavaScript fetching issues, but it gave us a very actionable page. So there's no schema on that page, which is indeed the case. And we can look at the page real quick too. It's kind of a traditional page. I think it was originally built in WordPress. It is now all JavaScript driven stuff. Look at the page source real quick. And you can see what that page actually looks like. And now let's go back to the analysis. By the way, no dogs were injured in the creation of this. So it's suggesting, based on the prompt, which is driven by the research, got to put some schema on here. So it's suggesting using local business schema, service schema, FAQ page schema. It assesses that the highest impact would be doing this, and then fixing the heading structure. So literally, if I was going to actually work on this, which I will eventually here, I would take this and I would copy all this, and I would say, or I would simply say, create a structured prompt. And fire it up. And that's literally all I would do. That structured prompt. You guys hear me?
You're kind of breaking up a little bit.
Yeah, my the phone grabbed my AirPods for a second here. Anyway, always put yourself on do not disturb. Do that on my phone real quick. Hopefully my audio is back and better. But now I've got a structured prompt, and I will probably take this when it's done and give it to Claude Code and ask it to build basically a demo site on probably Pages and go from there. So we've got the entire process. And it gave us an implementation checklist, which is very nice. And Fun at 4.5 is just kicking ass right now. I'm sure it won't continue to do so well, but right now we've got some good stuff. So that's certainly one approach to doing this. And you could, do something a lot less invasive, less radical surgery, and just take that the schema and add it to this page. That probably would be the quicker win, and probably maintain sort of the brand identity that the site has right now. Not that the dog groomer's got a big brand identity, but that's the way it goes. So any questions on that process? Seeing none. Oh, 1
Garrett,
minute. Yeah.
how does this? I mean, there's a few other audit for AI out there. How does what you're doing versus possibly what other companies or individuals are kind of putting out there as audit tools for for AI for your websites?
So I have looked at this from sort of a whole cloth perspective. I wanted to do my own research, and in this case, I also incorporated in AirOps research, which I from what I could see of their approach, their methodology, it looked solid to me. And proceeded from there. I have done a number of AI audits on a variety of companies. And to do that, I also kind of created my own tool set using data for SEO and its ability to test. It basically can run queries against a number of models. I don't think it does Grok right now, but it covers the rest of the bases pretty well. And yes, this prompt right here is page by page, Pete. You could adjust the prompt to do multiple pages. Probably important in the case where you've got, sorry for being tangential here. You could probably adjust this considerably if you've got a site that's got a heavy JavaScript implementation on a homepage, and then it's got content pages that are less JavaScript driven or less image driven or design driven. Back to the original question of John's. what I've seen so far from some of the commercial tools that are out there, the SaaS tools, they don't meet my needs very well. And there's a couple of issues. The biggest issue that I hit on is when I replicate the work that I see the SaaS tools doing, I don't see the same thing when I'm just prompting kind of freestyle, going to the web interface and doing the prompt and checking. And I think there's a couple things happening there. One is there's a difference between AI calls and the way most people use, say, ChatGPT or Claude, in that both ChatGPT and Claude have context windows and custom instructions oftentimes in place that impact things, and the API calls are free of those, which that's not 100% the case. There's two factors. There's hidden state drift and there's KV caching that will even impact API calls. But I'm just not seeing that degree of consilience in the off the shelf solutions that I'm seeing. So when I'm doing an audit, I just did one for a South African financial firm, an investment bank, and that's consumer facing. I found that there was some deltas between the API data and what I was getting from ChatGPT, but I was mostly looking for sort of the ground truth type stuff. So there's not a tool out there that I would trust right now. I'd rather cobble up something from scratch and understand what's producing the data rather than having a black box on top of multiple black boxes giving me a result. I think there are directionally accurate things you can find, but I think a lot of this stuff is going to be interfered with by the fact that Cloudflare is blocking so many sites now, blocking so many AI engines. I think that there are also issues that are going to be more and more complicated as the chat models try to expand their context window and become more responsive to consumers, more interested in the consumer focus versus sort of the generic focus of prompting. And also, there's other factors that come into play when people start gaming the LLM. So when you're starting to squeeze the vector space, you're going to see different types of results. And I don't think a lot of these engines are going to be very responsive to that, so that there's going to be a larger and larger delta between what people actually experience and what the tool suggests. So anyway, my 2 cents, I'm sure there are ways that you can compensate for that, but I'd rather, in what I'm going to I am creating here's the pitch part of today, a coaching session where we'll match this approach with, a little deeper analysis. So Pete's got a question. Yeah, Pete asked, you mentioned simple sentence structure being good or the data suggesting it's positive. How does that jive with semantic triples and semantic layering? I think there's a conflict there. And I think that there is, I think we end up with a couple of things. I think we end up with two sorts of content, one that is aimed at the LLMs and one that is slightly more nuanced. But I also think you can do relatively simple structure i.e. not writing like I do, and incorporating semantic triples. So semantic triples just, I mean, just good writing is going to reflect its semantic triple. And, you know, Hemingway's got semantic triples in every one of his sentences, I would bet. Laryng's a little more complicated. And then you ask, is it retrieval versus training? I think I think it is, there's a bias towards training. So, training runs are going to respond because of the volume and because of the, you know, you're constructing the vector relationships in training as opposed to trying to influence them. You are trying to relate entities to one another in training runs. And it's slightly more complicated because if you look at what happens then in sort of the MOE or the reinforcement learning stuff, it looks more like inference than the training runs themselves would look like. So I don't know that I have an answer for that. I don't know that necessarily. I mean, I just was looking at some of the, there's a paper 2 weeks ago. Actually, it wasn't, it was somebody's PhD diss that I stumbled across. And they kind of looked at this question of how much does RL impact how training data is represented. And I came away with being a little confused, but also thinking that reinforcement learning ends up looking more like inference than it does like training. And I can't off the cuff give you a stronger answer than that. I can go back and sort of look through that paper and see if it meets sort of my smell test. So it's a really good question. And I don't know the answer right now. And I'm not sure that the answer is known or is knowable at this point. But I do think training ingestion and inference are probably getting closer together, rather than where they had been in the past. So, you know, the original training runs for LLMs looked a lot like image recognition models because that was the state of the art and still is the same in some senses. So, you know, image recognition diffusion models are different from LLMs, but they were the first to be really well trained or have good results, I guess is probably more accurate. And so that image models are trained in a very certain way. You give it a bunch of images and then there's human labeling, or they use an image data set that has labels on it. So, you know, an image of a cat is labeled as an image of a cat, an image of a dog is labeled as an image of a dog. And then you give it a bunch of those, and then you, it goes through the process of like trying to differentiate between the human labels and the images, the pixel mapping. And then it tries to write onto a new image, essentially its takeaways from the human labeled stuff and starts labeling images on its own. And then humans basically check that. That's the process by which image modeling is done. And so those that process in training diffusion models is the way that the ChatGPT 1 and ChatGPT 2 were trained, because that was the state of the art and that was the recognized best way of, you know, sort of programming all this stuff. And now we've got a couple things happening. We've got, you know, We've got the MOE, the mixture of experts looking at training data, meaning multiple sort of sub AIs looking at the training data as it comes through and making judgments on that as it's ingested into the model. And then you've got the piece where we've got reinforcement learning, where it takes a training set and then generates, and then it grabs synthetic data from other LLMs and parses that through reinforcement learning. And so we're now multiple generations away from that fusion model. And we also have a situation where the AIs are now guiding their own training. I don't know how, we don't know in GPT-5, for example, how much of that was training was guided by AI informed coding, where the AI is in real time, like optimizing its training runs. You can look at DeepSeek, the DeepSeek papers, and see a lot more of that. Also, the Allen Institute models 2 through 3, where the AI is interpreting its training data through the run, kind of bootstrapping itself. And we don't have interpretability. We don't have visibility into a lot of that stuff. So it's drifting further and further away from the diffusion models, and it makes it more and more difficult to sort of make that interpretation. So that is a deep rabbit hole, and now I'm like 5 minutes down it or more. So I'm going to punt on answering that question. But as long as the data that we see is kind of has this orientation towards structured data, then that's what I would go for if I am trying to either create ground truth, or meaning ground truth being something that the model takes on its training data and incorporates in. So the relationship between, entity X and entity Y is, some vector or some cosine product, or cosine similarity or dot product. I am lost in the weeds now thinking about all this. I'm going to go back to pitching, which is what I wanted to do. Anyway, hopefully I covered some of that stuff. Anyway, I'm launching this hidden state drift mastermind, looking at AI and tactical SEO execution, but also kind of the bigger issues of AI automation and building tools, and what it takes to sort of create a deliverable on that end. One of the problems is that all this stuff is moving so quickly. It's very difficult for folks to keep up. It's difficult for me to keep up. So one of my goals in creating a mastermind is to help others keep up, but also force myself to keep up by going through the exercise of working through problems and not just focusing on the outcome, but focusing on understanding the problem and the solution path well enough that I can explain it to others. If I sit down and work on a problem like, in the data set that we were just discussing, I follow the path that I follow, and it's oftentimes not the most structured path, because I'll come up with new ideas midstream, and it's just not necessarily conducive to the best outcomes. Whereas if I focus on a solution path that I want to be able to communicate to other folks, I end up with usually a better result and also a more efficient process for myself. So that's the selfish reason for building this as a mastermind endeavor, but also just to help folks keep up, and then refine my own thinking through the Socratic method by having Pete asking me questions that I don't have answers to. Here's the issue that I have with most masterminds that I've been a part of. One is that there is kind of a unidirectional focus, meaning whoever's doing the mastermind has their material, they present it, and it is not necessarily interactive, and it is really driven by what they're thinking or what they're working on, versus the needs of the folks in the mastermind themselves. So I think there's two ways to cure that. One is to have the mastermind sessions themselves be a little more open in structure. Two, to have one-on-one meetings with basically kind of consulting sessions with people participating in the mastermind to find out where they're at, so that there's a better match between people's needs and the content that's created and then delivered. So what I am proposing is a mastermind with a difference. One is that anybody that signs up for 6 months is going to get a 30-minute consultation, basically, almost like an intake process, find out what folks' priorities are, what their pain points are, what their capabilities are, what their asset sets are. The other thing is less structured, and that will be office hours, which, anybody familiar with, if you had a decent professor, you could go in during office hours and ask questions and just have a free-flowing discussion. Some of the best courses I ever took, it'd be multiple people hanging out in an office and peppering prof with questions. Had an econ prof who his name was Ruben Zubro. I was not the best student in college, but I remember coming into one of Zubro's office hours, and he was sitting around with his postdocs, and I'd missed a couple classes because I'd been traveling, and this is when we had the market collapse in October of '87, and in office hours, the postdocs were sitting around. This was like, I think it was the Monday after the collapse. I think the collapse happened it was Black Friday. But I went in to get the assignments that I missed and try to catch up and plead for forgiveness for missing a pop quiz, and ended up sitting in and on a great session with Zubro talking about market dynamics and the crash, and postdocs offering up their stuff. And it was just one of those things where I learned more in that 45-minute BS session about equity markets than I learned the rest of my life, all considered. It was really an amazing thing. And so I want to try to foster that environment again, where people can just come in, surface topics, ask Pete type questions, and get people talking about it and get ideas that aren't necessarily my own, but just have that kind of free flowing discussion. And the last piece that I really want to make work in a mastermind is something that I don't want to drive, but I want to give the opportunity for people to create external accountability mechanisms with peers. And so I've done this after a couple of events where we've done these PAGs, these peer accountability groups, where there's small groups. So say if there's 10 people in the mastermind, then we would have 5 people in a peer accountability group, and they would share some goals and some timelines, and just talk through that stuff, but keep people on track. I've done events where I've hosted them or co-hosted them, and I walk away from the event with a big list of to-dos, and rapidly stuff happens, and inevitably you get off track and you don't focus on the takeaways. Or you go to a bigger event like an SEO spring training, and you get a half dozen things that you're going to try to work on, and you end up executing on 2 or 3 of them. And those 2 or 3 things can provide a tremendous amount of value, but that other stuff that you could have also provided value goes by the wayside because you're not working with other folks that had the same experiences, or you don't have that external accountability. Most of us are driven by commercial needs or client needs, and those always, prioritize the urgent and sometimes not the important. And what I want to do is give people some tools where they can focus on the important as well as the urgent. This is a regurgitation. The model's broken. That's probably an overstatement. AI helped me with that, you can tell. But I want to have a mastermind that is, that is not just my ideas, that actually is where my ideas are nothing but a point of departure, and where people can surface things that they need, and do it in a way where it's going to maximize benefit for the entire group. And then the other piece is the implementation piece. I do like this. Inspiration without implementation is just expensive entertainment. Want to break through, want to deliver some ROI. So, a little explanation of peer accountability groups. There's basic, it's a very basic process. It's, set clear goals, whether you do that jointly or you do that on your own, but you create goals that you can share. You want measurable objectives, and you want regular check-ins. So these groups would meet once a month, or maybe more frequently if people wanted to. But that's what folks can kind of self-select. And then celebrating wins, because frankly, when you do something pretty cool, if you don't have anybody to share it with, you can get burnt out, or you can enjoy life a lot less. And so I think, that process of celebrating wins, however you do it, whether it's taking your wife out to dinner, your spouse out to dinner, don't want to be gender specific here, or doing something fun with your kids or your family or your friends or whatever, celebrating wins is important, and finding a little vehicle to do that in is damn cool. So that's got to be part of the process with the pack. And then we talked about monthly office hours, but that's just a chance to connect with folks. It's always easier to solve other people's problems than your own. At least it is for me. I'm crappy at solving my own problems, and much, much better at finding solutions for others. And folks that sign up for 6 months at a shot, they'll get that strategic consultation, that onboarding session. And then in the second 6-month session, we would come back and do kind of progress and optimization. So these intakes will be after we've done a session or two, and then kind of a check-in and refocus at month 8. And then the core sessions will be twice monthly, power sessions, where something like today, where we've got a problem, we've got a path, and then we look at solutions. But probably a lot more granular than this talk, where we probably would either go into Claude Code and build some stuff, or we would have some stuff that's built in parallel to the sessions. So it can be painful to build live and online. So we'd probably see some stuff kind of time-lapse photography style. And that's it. Here's the pitch. Blah, blah, blah. Where strategy meets implementation, where you finally ship. So anyway, that's Hidden Drift. And you can, this is going to be limited. I'll put the actual stuff here if I can find what I did with it. In here. And hopefully this works better than the Zoom links did. The biannual and the monthly. So the price points are, for right now, I think I'll stick there. The 6 month is $579. The monthly is $105. So the 6 month gets you committed, gets me committed, triggers that consultation, which I think is key to maximizing value and doing something different from these other programs. And the monthly is at 105. So you don't get the consultation. Really like this mountain peak image here with the sun somehow situated between this peak and the other mountains in the range. But anyway, it's amazing how I get off on my own tangents, isn't it? Anyway, taking this back, 6 months, I hope people are interested in doing, as you're watching this either live or in the recording. Would love to have folks get involved. It would help me immensely to drive my own business forward, and hopefully drive folks' business forward as well. Or just for some folks, I think this is going to be an opportunity to explore AI technology and tech stacks, even if they're not necessarily in an IM or SEO space. There's going to be something, I think, for everybody. It's going to be, a lot of it will be research driven, meaning either research that I'm doing or research that I'm reading. That's my working style and has been for a number of years. I read technical or scientific papers in a variety of areas, health, longevity, exercise science, a lot of stuff in the social sciences, on a regular basis. I try to read 2 or 3 papers every week, and then I try to implement or create learnings from them that I can pass on one way or another, either creating content or, just executing in my own life. I'm going to bring the same approach to these masterminds. I'm going to continue to do my own primary research on things that I find interesting, particularly now with data for SEO. It's an amazing, amazing tool. It's really transformed the way that I think about SEO and the AI overviews and LLM content stuff, because there's now a very powerful tool set that's very accessible and very cheaply so. But there's tons and tons of other research that needs to be kind of brought to bear. I think there's literally probably 150 AI papers published, most of them pre-pubs, every week. Sorting through those things, I use Semantic Scholar to kind of build citation trees and look at stuff and surface stuff. There's also a couple other platforms that I use to kind of screen that academic seed material. But that's the way I work and have worked for years in various areas. I started doing this type of stuff back when I was in my 20s. I was the International Association of Political Consultants invited me to become a member when I was, I think, 27 years old. And so my piece was always trying to look at the political science and social science research, particularly on the quantitative end, and find tools and approaches that consultants could use kind of in real time. And I remember my very first presentation, which was back in 1994, I think, where I did, chi-square analysis of voter file data. I think I was maybe the first person to do that, certainly the first person to do that in sort of that context. Other academics used voter file data in various ways, but was using it to probe for causalities and patterns and targeting information, that kind of stuff. So I've been doing this type of stuff for a long, long time. And it's what drives me, that and systemic failures, my other intellectual hobby. And that's the kind of focus that I will try to bring to a mastermind. So with that, if anybody's got any questions,
Hey,
you can ask
Darren,
them.
would you just one more time quickly run through the 6 month one and what we get for that?
Sure, 6 months would be maybe. Can I run through them? I cannot. Anyway, the big difference. Oh, here we go. The big difference with the 6 month is A, it's cheaper, and B, these onboard sessions, the 30-minute one-on-one consultations. I'm going to go ahead and have office hours open to everybody, whether they're monthly or not. Thought about doing that just for the people doing the 6 month. But really, I think this is the piece where other masterminds fall down a little bit. I'm not trying to criticize anybody. Right now I'm paying for just one mastermind, and that's Derek Pierce's. I'm not trying to cast shade on what he does, but I've been part of several masterminds over the years. And this office hours piece is really, I think, something that's necessary because it opens up and lets people surface their stuff. I guess the other mastermind that I'm part of, which isn't a paid mastermind, is what Garrett does every week. And most of our sessions kind of turn into office hours at the end. And that's really a valuable thing. I guess if you're paying for TSD, it's part of the thing, and not enough people are taking advantage of that. So hopefully that answered your question. The peer accountability group is going to be for everybody, and that's not going to be something that I drive. I'm going to set up a framework. I will drop into I'll drop in periodically in the first meetings of each PAG, but that's going to be they're not top down driven. They're people talking to people. It's peer accountability. So that's whether you do the monthly or the 6 month, that's going to be part of it. And that's really going to be, something where people don't have to participate in those. That's not mandatory. But I want that to be part of it. I want to stop going to events myself and walking away with, a bunch of things that I don't execute on. From like spring training, the big thing, my big takeaway was Greg Ortiz's stuff on N8N. I'd had N8N set up for a while. I had not executed along that path, and I'd been on that actually from the AI event I had done here in Denver a year and a half ago. Clark Mackey did a quick session, much like he did for Camp SEO, Darkest AI, Holly and Ice thing, where he explained how to do N8N. Of course, N8N was nowhere near as capable in 2024 as it is today. But I took that on board, and then I didn't do anything with it. And it took me to something that Greg Ortiz said, clicked in my head. It was like, oh, now I know what I need to do. I need to go and I need to take all the N8N documentation and I need to put it into a Claude project so that I've got all that material in one place and I can ask questions of it and have it do my workflows for me, or at least help me figure out how to do my workflows. Because N8N is not exactly a friendly environment. I mean, it's once you get used to it and can, freeze the data and look at the steps and stuff, you eventually get some comfort level with it. But I could not have done what I've been able to do in 8N without that idea. That I don't think it wasn't something that Greg said, but it was something that he said that spurred me to the conclusion, oh, what I need to do is I need to take all the documentation and some working workflows and put all that in a Claude project so that Claude could use that as sort of ground truth or a RAG, however you want to term it, and use that to inform the work that it does. It's the same process that in Claude Code that you do with when you give it access to context 7, I think it is the API documentation. That MCP has a ton of API documentations in it, and then Claude Code can work with that, or you can do it through Klein. But once you've got that on board, then everything's in one spot, but also it's got the resources there. It's not constantly going out to search for documentation, et cetera. It's got that ground truth available. So, that one 30-minute session with Greg took me down this entire road that I would not have gone down. But then as you get to sticking points, what do? You really need that extra kick in the pants that you get from having other people saying, well, 2 weeks ago, you said you were going to do X, Y, and Z by, the 15th of the month. And having, that piece of that deadline for a deliverable, even though it's just internal to yourself, is pretty motivating for me. Not everybody works that way. And I realize that there are people out there that don't, that can continue on multiple paths at the same time and execute on everything that they ever wanted to execute on. But I don't think that's a very common thing. I think a lot of people go through, particularly this kind of the stuff where we're technologists, right? We are working with evolving technology stacks. We are working on literally the bleeding edge of things. If you are particularly in the SEO environment at this moment, you've got to be doing the basics and the fundamentals, but you also have to be executing on keeping up to speed and finding new ways to do things and keeping the ROI available for you by exploring automations and agents. And that's where we are right now in October of 2025. And I think that's where we are going to be for a period of, at least 36 months, maybe longer. I do think we will get to the point where the agents will be powerful enough and accessible enough that a lot of the stuff will happen without us actually having to dig in and get our fingers dirty or get the grime underneath our fingernails. But for right now, wherever you're at in this ecosystem, you've got to do stuff that isn't that has a longer term time frame for execution or end goals than just the stuff that you've got to get done this week, whether that's content creation or a report for a client or whatever it is. I think you've got to lift your eyes to the horizon a little bit to be effective and stay competitive. And I think that the easiest way for me to do that is to have some type of accountability situation, whether it's with peers or, a lot of what I do is I tell my wife that I'm going to do X by, the end of the week or whatever it is. And if I don't, then there's some penalty for me. And I won't go through what those penalties might be, but it's just an accountability situation and giving her license to nag me to get something done. That's, a less friendly way of doing something where you've got peers that you just have something in common with and you're going to work along the same path and, have that ability to celebrate with when you actually figure something out or you get a win. And that to me is really worthwhile. So extremely long answer to the question of what the difference between 6 months and monthly is. But the big difference is, I think if people, fund it for 6 months, then you're more invested, you get more value out of it. But the biggest difference is you get that one-on-one consultation. But the big differentiator here to me is, the idea of using office hours and the idea of you using a peer accountability group to move forward. So there's the very, very long answer to your question, which was really quite simple. Anybody else have any questions? Otherwise, I need to shut it down because I've been talking for an hour and a half now, almost. Other questions in the chat? Seeing none. All right. Hey, thanks for the folks that showed up. And if you've sat through this whole thing, including that long pitch session, appreciate it. I guess I'll probably have to cut this up into shorter segments for the replay. But again, thanks everybody. I'm going to end the meeting. Hopefully I recorded this damn thing.